With you again today, and before I begin, I'd like to say thank you very much to the cover teacher, Mr. Tim, for being with the class today. An excellent class who have been working on the slave trade for the last few weeks. In today's lesson then, we're actually going to go on to the end of our story now and try to analyse why slavery was actually abolished. That means banned, made illegal in the year 1807 by the British Parliament in England. Okay, you'll be using mainly in today's session these extracts from the textbook to make a series of notes. The notes are actually contained upon this Google document, and within these four categories then you will be making some notes from the text. Okay, but before I go on to describe that in more detail, I want to start today's lesson by looking at this. You will find it on the Google Classroom as well. And what it is a chronology of the slave trade and its eventual abolition, its eventual banning. Now, chronology is a timeline, okay? And you will see from this timeline that our story begins in the year 1444, which was before 1492 when Christopher Columbus discovered the Americas or the Caribbean. So we start our story there with the practice of African slaves, African people being enslaved by the Portuguese, who were obviously transporting enslaved peoples to Portugal to sell. 1482, the Portuguese start building a permanent slave trading post on the Gold Coast of Ghana. And then we see our story where we joined it in 1510, slaves being taken to the Spanish colonies in South America. At that point where our story really started with the explosion in the demand for the key crops like sugar, okay, and the need then to have people to work on the plantations. Our timeline kind of goes cold until the year 1777. The significance of that is that between 1518 and 1777, we see this enormous growth in the slave trade. You know, we estimate 6 million people. I'm sure there was more who were being transported from Africa to the Americas. Okay, so 1777 is where we first begin to see action to outlaw slavery. And we have one state, after the American Revolution of 1777, one state of Vermont decided to make it illegal for anyone to own slaves. Okay, 1780s, the peak of the profits in the transatlantic slave trade, and then we see here in Britain. 1787, a Society for the Abolition of the Slave Trade is founded by a man called Granville Sharp and Thomas Clarkson. And then that's where we pick up our story, 1807, the abolition of the slave trade. Okay, and we'll be looking into what happened in between 1780 and 1807 for this to actually occur. But shockingly for me, I think, and probably for all of us, is that isn't the end of the story. It continues. And of course, gradually, bit by bit, countries around the world who were involved in the slave trade agree that it is immoral and should be banned. So we have the United States actually trying to ban it in 1808. But if we look down here, it wasn't until 1863 that in the Constitution of America, following the Civil War, that they made slaves free. That they were allowed to be no longer enslaved. A good 60 years. In here, we have the French abolishing slavery in 1848. Brazil, 1851. That's slave trading. They have to wait until 1888 for them to actually abolish slavery. We have Cuba in here. We have Denmark in here. And I suppose this timeline just highlights to me really the interesting element to the evolution of the slavery. It's a long time in development and way too long for it to be banned. The last date here is even more significant for me though. In 1948, the United Nations finally takes on board the Declaration of the Human Rights, Within that, there's an article saying that no one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms. Okay, so that's really the global recognition in 1948 that slavery is illegal and should not be tolerated and should be found and people should be punished. Of course, some of us are aware that this issue with slavery probably still does exist today in the form of human trafficking and other variety of guises. Okay, so that's our timeline just to reflect upon, and then that contextualizes what really you're studying today. Okay, and it's the case study of why Britain eventually banned the slave trade. Okay, here's the table. There are 4 sections on the PDF you're going to be reading. One is about economics. The other one is about this is a story of how the slave trade was abolished, maybe not just purely because it was abhorrent and disgusting and against human rights, but possibly because it was no longer profitable to transport slaves from Africa and to use them on the plantations. And also there's another theory in there as well about the efficiency of a slave compared to someone who you're employing and paying. So was economics more of an important factor in it being banned? The second section you'll read is about actual uprising and rebellion. We did look at the Nat Turner rebellion in the last lesson, but this highlights then that in certain areas in the New World, there were some societies who were uprising against their owners or the governments and fighting for their freedom. So on the basis of this then, we're trying to make the argument that the slave trade was eventually abolished because it was too difficult to control the slaves. That's one factor to consider. I don't know how important it is when you look at the great scheme of things. This section here is about racism and how actually you can see behind a lot of the exploitation of African people was definitely a racist agenda, wherein people were described and treated like animals. You have some extracts here actually from people who at the time were well-respected scientists or commentators on society. Okay, and here we have some quite obvious, explicitly racist extracts. Okay, and in this section we're trying to highlight that if society was looking and accepting slavery because really they felt superior to black people, and therefore black people, it was closely appropriate to treat them that way, at one point then, somewhere in this, the mood shifted or the opinion shifted or it went back to where it should be. And what was that? How was that achieved? And we look at this example of Olaide Equiano, whose book, which was published in the 1780s, was extraordinarily popular and highlighted to everyone the intelligence and articulate nature of every human being, no matter what colour of their skin. And that's significant in getting the masses to realise that there is an element to the slave trade, which is quite obviously disgusting and abhorrent and must be banned. Okay, and then your 4th section then is about these religious campaigners. Ultimately, when slavery is abolished, it's because the members of Parliament ban it. Okay, they actually say this must not carry on. So it's at that point then you have to investigate why these people did actually make that decision. And one element to this then is the anti-slavery campaigners who went out of their way to make speeches and to publish articles and to protest in the streets and publicise the injustices of the slave trade. We have some extracts from the writings of a man called William Wilberforce, and we also find out that he was actually in the in the Parliament of Britain speaking against this, which ultimately convinces people to vote against it. Okay. So please, what you've got to do here is make notes from this. Give me the evidence. I put some leading questions in there for you to actually do. Like explain the 2 theories from the text or give examples of the rebellion. What were the lies of racism and how were they challenged? And what were the names of the important people involved in campaigning for the end of slavery, and what did they do? So fill in those sections based upon those questions. And then finally, I want you to go on to answer this question as fully as you've got the time to do. Okay? So the statement is this. Do you agree or disagree with the following statement? The slave trade was banned in Britain in 1870 purely because it was an inhumane industry. Explain your answer. What I'm stating here then is, after reading all this and looking at this evidence about why the slave trade was abolished, can we say that it was basically banned because people realised it was an inhumane industry? Or was it more a fact of economics, that the efficiency of slave workers was proven to be not as good as if you paid people to work for you, or that the price of sugar had dropped significantly, so there was no more profit in the plantations, hence you no longer needed people to be working on the plantations? Was that a more important factor in convincing people that it was no longer necessary to have slaves? Or was it still purely the inhumane act of people? So I want you in this last section just to balance that argument and make your case. You're welcome to agree and disagree with the statement. On the one hand, you could say this, on the other hand, you could say the other thing. Okay. Throughout the session, I'm going to be online. I'll put a Google Meet link on the Google Classroom. So with the permission of Mr. Tim, you can connect with me and I can help you individually at any time. Okay, but we'll see how that works. And with that, I'll leave you to it. I'll be checking the work as you go through it. Please make sure you do an excellent job, and I wish you all the best.